Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever tried to roll out a new software system, restructure a department, or just change a simple everyday workflow, you know exactly how frustrating it can be when people suddenly push back. Today, we're going to dive straight into the hidden psychological forces that make organizational change so incredibly difficult. And more importantly, we'll explore how you, as a leader, can design better systems to work with human nature instead of constantly fighting against it.
Section 1. The Hidden Resistance. Let's kick things off with a quick scenario that perfectly illustrates why your employees might be dragging their feet on that brand new initiative. If I walked up to you right now and offered you this exact gamble, just a simple coin flip where heads wins you $110 and tails means you lose $100, would you take it? Really think about it for a second. Now, mathematically speaking, the expected value of this coin flip is actually a positive $5 every single time you play. It's a completely mathematically sound bet. Yet, if you're like the vast majority of people, you probably just instantly rejected the offer in your head. But why?
Well, it's because we just don't care about the math, right? Most people turn it down flat because avoiding the sheer pain of a $100 loss completely overrides the appeal of a $110 gain. That simple internal monologue, I don't want to lose $100, is actually the foundational, invisible force behind why your people resist change.
Section 2. The Science of Loss. Let's dig into the actual science behind this fear. Back in 1979, two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, introduced a concept called prospect theory. And this literally upended traditional economics. Before this, economists just assumed people evaluated choices purely based on their final wealth. But Kahneman and Tversky proved that, actually, we judge things relative to our current baseline, our reference point. We don't look at absolute value, we look at whether something feels like a gain or a loss compared to exactly where we are right now.
And here is the kicker. The crucial point is this ratio. Kahneman and Tversky found that a loss doesn't just feel bad, it feels roughly twice as bad as an equivalent gain feels good. The pain of losing $100 stings twice as much as the joy of finding $100. This is the 2-to-1 ratio of loss aversion, and I guarantee you it is quietly running in the background of every single business decision your team makes.
This exact 2-to-1 ratio of pain was famously proven in an experiment illustrating the endowment effect. Imagine researchers just handing out these standard run-of-the-mill university coffee mugs, nothing fancy at all, and asking participants what they'd sell them for. Meanwhile, they asked buyers what they would pay for them. The owners demanded roughly twice as much money as the buyers were willing to offer. Simply owning that basic everyday mug became their new reference point, and giving it up registered as a massive, unacceptable loss. It's wildly irrational, sure, but it is completely human.
Section 3. The Power of Defaults.
So how does this deep-seated fear of loss show up in our choices? Well, it's all about the framing effect. Tversky and Kahneman ran this famous Asian disease study involving a hypothetical public health crisis. They discovered that people make drastically different choices on identical medical programs based purely on whether the outcomes are framed as a gain, like lives saved, or a loss, lives lost. It's the exact same data, but the frame flips our psychological response entirely.
In the workplace, framing is an absolute game changer. Take compensation, for example. We've all been there. A pay cut is processed as a deeply painful loss. But framing the exact same mathematical salary change as just a smaller than usual raise makes it feel like a smaller gain. The arithmetic hasn't changed one bit, but the emotional response and the resulting employee morale will be wildly different.
We see this incredibly powerfully with status quo bias. Just look at the monumental difference between opt-in and opt-out policies. When countries or large employers change their retirement savings or organ donation programs from opt-in to opt-out, enrollment doesn't just bump up a little, it skyrockets. Why? Because the default becomes the new reference point. Abandoning that default suddenly feels like you're taking a loss.
As this quote really hits the nail on the head, this is exactly what happens during organizational change. Whenever you introduce a new policy or a shiny new software tool, your employees automatically treat the old way as their default reference point. So giving it up triggers that 2-to-1 psychological pain. They aren't comparing your new tool to some objective, logical baseline. They're comparing it to what they feel like they are losing.
Moving on to Section 4. Designing better incentives. Okay, if loss aversion is just baked into human nature, how are we accidentally turning our corporate incentive structures into literal organizational danger zones?
Well, look at the behavioral agency model. An employee sitting safely above their quota plays it safe, right? They're comfortable in the domain of games. But an employee staring down a hard cliff bonus threshold near the end of the quarter, they enter a loss frame. Suddenly, to avoid that loss, they become incredibly risk-seeking, sometimes even taking unethical shortcuts. Your system is literally incentivizing risky behavior without you even realizing it.
And hey, it's not just frontline employees doing this. Leaders fall into the escalation of commitment trap all the time. This is when you just keep pouring money and resources into a failing pet project. Why do we do this? Because pulling the plug would make the loss final and lock in a definitive reputational hit. So leaders keep gambling, pouring more and more resources into a sinking ship, hoping against hope to recover, rather than just taking a smaller, certain loss.
So how do you snap out of it? You have to shift your perspective. You need to move from narrow framing to broad framing. Instead of agonizing over a single decision in isolation and feeling the sharp sting of every single lost project, you have to view that one lost project as just a single bet in a much larger portfolio of decisions. Doing this massively reduces your emotional volatility and stops that escalation of commitment dead in its tracks.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Leading Through Organizational Change.
Now that we understand the psychology at play here, how do we actively lead through it? First things first, smooth out your incentive curves. You've got to avoid those hard cliffs that push employees into desperation and reckless behavior. Second, set predetermined exit criteria for new projects absolutely before you ever get emotionally attached to them. And third, just name the pattern out loud. When you realize your team is operating in a panic or a loss frame, saying it out loud actually weakens its psychological pull over the group.
When you're actually in the trenches rolling out structural changes, here is your 3-step playbook. Step 1, do not dismiss the pain. Acknowledge the loss plainly to your team. Step 2, and this is a huge one, shrink that perceived loss by explicitly spelling out which relationships and roles are not changing. If you don't say it, I promise you, they will assume they're losing it. And step 3, involve people early so they have some agency. You want to turn a forced top-down change into something they actually helped build.
The big takeaway here is beautifully summed up in this quote. Employee resistance is not some inherent character flaw. It's not a lack of ambition, and it's certainly not just stubbornness. It is a universal, highly predictable feature of the human operating system. People are just evaluating outcomes relative to their own reference points and doing their absolute best to navigate what feels to them like a real threat.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on before you head into your next board meeting or team restructuring. Knowing everything you know now about the 2-to-1 ratio of loss, status quo bias, and the sheer power of defaults, how are you going to frame your next big initiative to work with human psychology instead of fighting against it?